Hello, everyone. I am your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and this is the Truth That Heals podcast. Today, we have Beth Bonness, a stroke survivor, coming to share her story, and she's going to be sharing with us how life was like right before the stroke happened, how it changed her life. She'll be sharing with us what it feels like going through aphasia, where you have all these words in your head, but they don't come out of your mouth, or how it was just so hard to capture the right words. And she'll be explaining it in more detail, so stay tuned for that. But overall, that she's also going to be sharing with us how during this recovery, her family was on her side, and eventually she found the words to write a book. She is the author of the book Transition Thunderstorms. And at the very end of this interview, she'll be actually sharing one of her poems with us. So stay tuned for that. And before we get started with the actual interview, just a little heads up that the connection at times was a little off. So if you're hearing a bad connection, it's not going to be your device. It's not going to be your Wi-Fi or whatever. During the recording session, our connection was off at times. But despite that, listen to her story. She has an amazing story to share, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you have not yet subscribed to The Truth That Heals on YouTube or on whatever platform you're using, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever, please feel free to give a follow, to give a thumbs up, and to share this with others. Thank you.
She's going, should I call 911? And I'm like, no, she should have called 911. I'm like, no. And so it probably lasted a couple minutes where I couldn't talk. And then I said, just finished my hair. I'm going around the corner to have dinner with my husband and two of our three daughters. It's all fine. And my blood pressure was something like 215 over 110. It was just crazy high. And he goes, are you taking blood pressure medication? I only laugh now because I'm okay. And I said, no. And I said, I've been doing meditation and Tai Chi. And he goes, how's that? He didn't miss a beat. He didn't look at me. And he goes, how's that working out for you? And it's like, well, apparently not very well if I come in with my blood pressure at that level.
Welcome back to a new episode on the Truth That Heals podcast. Today, I am with a special guest. She is the author of the book Transition Thunderstorms. I'm here with Beth Bonness. Welcome to the show, Beth.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, Ryan.
Now, I first discovered you actually on Twitter, and I see that you've written a book, but also that there is so much more beyond the book, so much more that your life has to tell. And to get this episode started, can you share us a bit of the background of your story, of your life?
Well, since we're using kind of transition thunderstorms as the container, um, I'm going to start kind of focusing around that, which had to do with I wanted to spend more time writing, and it took having a stroke to kind of help nudge me to reevaluate where I was. And so I'm going to start kind of with the stroke.
Okay.
It was, if you imagine, it was a little before the 2008 financial crisis. I was working in as an exec at a high-tech broadcast manufacturing firm, as was nature of that business. It was a week before Thanksgiving, and I had rescheduled my hair appointment. Something as some mundane as that, like two or three times. And it's like, I got to get my hair done. I got to get my hair done. So I rushed across town, was probably late for the last ones in the salon. And I am talking like when you're in the salon getting your hair cut, you've got the mirror across, right? So you're talking, and my hair, the color was in. And so the timer was going through my emails. And I read an email from the GM, my boss, and he talked about all hands on deck, do everything you can for sales, and rattle off a bunch of, actions for us. And I thought, just took a deep breath, and I thought, I'm going to answer this after dinner. I don't have to do it now. Took a breath. The buzzer went off. My stylist came, Mary came, And I was telling about my mom and a goofy, just a funny story. And all of a sudden in my peripheral vision, I see, and she's agitated. We're the only ones in the salon. And she's agitated. And I'm thinking, I'm trying to tell you this funny story. Will you just be quiet? And then I look and my lips aren't moving. And so here I'm in the chair. And so I watched myself have a stroke, not knowing that that's what I was having. The left side of my peripheral vision had white sparkles, which came to be known as evil snowflakes. It was a pressure. There was no pain. I had no headache. There was no, some people have a pop. And I didn't have any of that. She's going, should I call 911? And I'm like, no, she should have called 911. I'm like, no. And so it probably lasted a couple minutes where I couldn't talk. And then I said, just finished my hair. I'm going around the corner to have dinner with my husband and two of our three daughters. It's all fine. And so she finished, went around the corner, had dinner, didn't say anything, drove one of my daughters home about a mile, shouldn't have done that, and got home. And then the kids went up to do their homework. And I told my husband, I said, there's something I got to tell you. So he's like in panic mode, calling his sister, who's a nurse. I'm on the phone with Kaiser. Stroke didn't really I was 49. So it wasn't as young as many people, or some people have it, but it certainly wasn't my grandmother's age where stroke territory was. And so Kaiser said, don't drive yourself in, come on in. And so I'm still in my high heels and my, my type A personality, short skirt, suit kind of. There was a expat male nurse, and he's doing all the stats. And my blood pressure was something like 215 over 110. It was just crazy high. And he goes, are you taking blood pressure medication? I only laugh now because I'm okay. And I said, no. And I said, I've been doing meditation and Tai Chi. And he goes, how's that? He didn't miss a beat. He didn't look at me and he goes, how's that working out for you? And it's like, well, apparently not very well if I come in with my blood pressure at that level. So they put me on meds and told me to rest. It was diagnosed as a transitory ischemic stroke, which is a type of brain injury, and it's called warning stroke. So if people don't change behavior, you're most likely going to be guaranteed to have more. It's a warning stroke. So the docs told me to take off. So I ended up sending an email to my boss after dinner, but it wasn't the one that, as I said, it was a week before Thanksgiving. Things were fine. It was kind of like a forced vacation, but I didn't want to push anything. So I stopped exercising, was trying to sleep, wasn't doing anything at work, had to dispatch everything, which was hard, but did. And the holidays kind of made it easier to step away because it was so urgent, but somebody else was going to have to handle it. And then we're at Safeway, big cart full of food. And all of a sudden I see the sparkles again. So I tell my husband, he's like, we got to get to the doctor. I said, well, there's a blood pressure machine. Let's just go check the blood pressure machine. And I air it out. He did it. It read, mine aired out. So back to the hospital. So it took about 2.5 weeks of being in and out of the hospital, having the evil snowflakes, not being able to talk. My writing was awful. Walking, I never fell, but my balance, it felt like you were on a boat. So clearly something was wrong, but they thought it was migraine. Well, they thought maybe it was in my head because that had to be, women coming in saying they have problems, but then you don't exhibit them there. They thought it might be migraines then. Then they thought it might be MS. That was pretty scary. And then they thought it might be just some other cardiovascular thing. They really didn't know because I kept having them. And some of the things that I wrote in the book, and I'll get to how I ended up doing that chapbook, were a way from document what I was going through at the time. And so today actually is the 15th anniversary of my being out of the hospital. So because it was right today is.
Okay.
It happened the 14th of November, and then I was in and out of the hospital. It got to the point where my husband was like, we'll take that room and she needs those warm blankets. It was disconcerting at the fact they kept putting me on different, blood pressure medicine and cholesterol medicine. It wasn't stopping it. So it was diagnosed as an ischemic stroke. which is a blood clot, as opposed to a hemorrhagic stroke, which is a bleed and where people often feel a pop. So it's the one of the most common strokes. And the neurologist said that, I could have a full recovery over time. It was basically meds and rest that I needed to do. They put me on so many medications that once I was stabilized, part of their recovery methodology was really just, you need to rest. My neurologist said I needed to learn to operate at what 75% kind of energy level was versus 110 or 25 or whatever number. It was really hard at my job when it's a global job where you've got emails coming in from all over the world 24 hours a day. You're obviously not up 24 hours a day, but turning work off was hard. And so work was great because I took the rest of the year off and then went back part-time. And so trying to find stuff that I could do in the part-time I was there versus the things I was used to doing was hard because, and ego-wise, I wanted to do more, but I knew that was pushing it. I sometimes liken pressure as when you're speeding and you don't get caught. You can be speeding and there's no cop there, so you don't get caught. There's no accident. Well, it felt like with this TIA, I got caught. The blood pressure, I was trying to manage it. But because it's not an acute, my optimism was a little bit too optimistic, like, my style that I had. Mm-hmm. So then I didn't have work. My husband was great with the kids. He is a really good partner. It's not a sexist division of labor by any means. And we had started some property development. So we had some small landlord tasks to do, but I'd done all the invoicing and bookkeeping and stuff. And so he picked all that up so I could be me. I was the project. It was all mom was the project. And so I was determined to get off the meds, which made my husband understandably, I don't think he was mad. He was perplexed and he was not supportive because he said, you finally leveled off. Why would you want to jeopardize that? And in between the lines were like, I don't want to have to go through that again. I thought I was going to lose you. Your kids thought they were going to lose you. And so trying to advocate for myself, which is advice anybody, just whether you have a medical event or not, is good mantra to have. You have to know what you want. And in this case, I just knew I wanted to get off of all those meds. But I agreed. I said, if I do it with my doctor, with his approval, would you be okay with that? And so that was the compromise. And so my doctor was great. He was a hospitalist in the hospital, and I didn't have a primary. I mean, I went to see baby when I had pregnant. I kind of did the OB stuff, but I never went in for general checkups. And I had to have a doc. And so I said, can you be my doc? And he said, I've seen you more than I see many people just because you've been in and out so many times. So we would try things. And I had this big spreadsheet, color-coded spreadsheet. I still use it today. And it tracked what I experimented with. So I would do, obviously the blood pressure had to be checked. And so it was what level of the meds were. It'd be doing light cardio and working my way up and seeing how that affected the blood pressure. And then it would be Tai Chi and meditation. And so I got very good at knowing what was going to help balance it so that I could reduce the meds. So every month or so, new blood work and check in, and then cut the meds in half, wait another quarter. And so it took about 3 years, but I eventually got off all the meds, which just made me tickled. And what I found out this year is I didn't realize it. I was looking at what that date was, and it turned out to be the date that my first granddaughter was born later. So that's a nice, now I'll never forget that date because that was the day she was born. And that spreadsheet kind of became my tracking where you've been, because it doesn't feel like you move fast at all. And you take 2 steps forward, a couple steps back. And so seeing the progress was important for me. And I know I'm a data-driven person, but I know for some people who get demoralized because they don't see the progress, Just asking them to track it often is enlightening because they didn't think they were making that kind of progress. And you got the rest of your life, to kind of, it's not like you're trying to lose 50 pounds in a week. You're trying to up your weights and increase your distance and things like that. So that was that's the broad brush for kind of the stroke and getting off the meds.
Was there a lifestyle that you had which might have contributed to this, or were there any red flags, warning signs to it, or was this
Yeah, I think
just
it, they never came up with the exact diagnosis. And I know when they asked the question, is this a work related? And I thought, well, I didn't have the stroke at work, but when I was reevaluating what my stress level was, and the stress level was more that I wouldn't give myself a break. So I just have learned and have to be reminded. I'm retired now, so it's easier, but that you work really hard, but you need to have a break. Just like if you're exercising, it's not good to exercise 7 days a week, so your muscles can rebuild and you can, refresh yourself. And the same thing happens. I was really excited about the customers I was dealing with and was kind of in the prime of my life. And so I traveled a bunch, so it wasn't eating and drinking as healthy as when I would be here at home, and then not putting work away. Those were the two big ones. Um, because blood pressure is not something, unless you're checking it, which I wasn't on a regular basis, it's not something that it's not like a stomach ailment or a headache. It's kind of a silent killer from that, perspective. So I know they've come a long way in terms of, it used to be blood pressure was just checked when you went in for your
yeah.
annual and now the idea that you take one blood pressure reading once a year and that's what your blood pressure is ludicrous. So it could be
Yes.
too high or it could be too low. And so now self-reading and people tracking it at home is great, especially if there's a history in your family. The only warning on high blood pressure I really had was all three of my pregnancies. I had high blood pressure, which isn't totally unusual, but it was probably an indication. My mom had high blood pressure, but she was extremely overweight and she had diabetes and high cholesterol. And I didn't have the lifestyle she did from a weight perspective. So it wasn't that. But I think that the again, speeding and not getting caught with my lifestyle. And you're young and, I wasn't in my 20s, but I certainly felt like I was invincible and, could take on a whole lot more. So
And
listen to your body.
yes, I think it's very important to listen to the body, and I'm very glad
Mm-hmm.
that you shared that advice, that you spoke to your husband, you spoke with the doctor on
Mm-hmm.
making a plan uh, to reduce the medication, because I think it's sadly there are some people who completely go off medication on their own, out of their
Yeah.
own whim, but it's
Mm-hmm.
it's always wise to do things with the team, and you did it
Right.
with the best team, with the medical
Mm-hmm.
advisory and
Mm-hmm.
with your family. So
Mm-hmm.
now I would like to ask, since you had, was it only one stroke, or would you say it was multiple strokes?
It was multiple strokes. They called them neurological events. They didn't do an MRI after each one of the times I claimed to have it. So I had probably 3 MRIs done in the course of those 2 weeks. And so when those MRIs came back and were looked at, they saw that there was scar tissue it was in the left parietal lobe, that there was stroke activity back there. So whether they were smaller ones or one bigger one, they all kind of happened in a cluster.
Now, one thing that I've seen from stroke victims from my family, from relatives, is like a paralysis on
Mm-hmm.
one side of the body, and sometimes slurred
Mm-hmm.
speech. Was that something that you also faced, or was that something that you
I
didn't?
the there when the night of the TIA when I couldn't talk, I did thought, oh, I'll write it down, and I went to reach for my pen, and my hand was a claw, and that's when I kind of probably stopped smiling and said, okay, this is really serious. This isn't me
Yes.
just dehydrated and not eating, or whatever. And then there were other times when I go back and look at the notes where a leg may have felt tingly, but I never had the droopy. My husband has said a couple times when we went in that he could tell with my speech that the left side of my mouth, that he could see drooping a little bit. But the biggest, the snowflakes were an early warning when I'd see those snowflakes. And then I would start speaking gibberish. So there's one poem I wrote about wrong word dinner where we're sitting at the table, everything's fine, we're all joking. I'm in my robe because the doc has said I'm supposed to rest, but it's dinner. It's takeout probably because we've got stuff in the microwave. And I don't know what I said, but one of the girls pointed at an apple and I said orange. And then all their faces just kind of, all the smiles collapsed, and then pointed to something else. And I said chair, and it was a plate. I mean, something. So I was speaking, but I was not able to grab the right word. And then I just remember I just left the kitchen, and aphasia, which
Aphasia.
I didn't know that term. And so Bruce Willis now has it, which has led to, it's a
Mm.
different diagnosis. It's got early Alzheimer's or dementia. But aphasia is basically when you can't communicate, so you can't get the right word out, or you slur your words, or the words don't come out at all. But it's aphasia is the term, which I didn't know until I started doing some things and getting involved with other stroke survivors last year,
So,
which is crazy.
so let me ask you this, because you were starting to experience during that dinner where you couldn't name different items. You started experiencing this aphasia. Was
Mm-hmm.
it only were they like episodes, or did it now become a real condition that you had to like dig your way
That's
out
a
of?
really that's a good question, because whenever one of those events happened, either I had the snowflakes where they wouldn't go away, or I started speaking. And the kids had said, "Mom's not mom, something's wrong." We'd go to the hospital. So we wouldn't kind of sit and wait for me to take a nap or wait until the next day,
You go.
because something clearly was, we went. And that's what was so frustrating, was because I'd be at the hospital and I wouldn't still be doing it. And so my husband would repeat it again, because I had a really hard, it was, there's something else called neural fatigue, which I didn't understand that term until last year. Effort to be able to communicate is really difficult. So you get very specific about what thought am I going to try to work really hard to get out. And so, when you go back and repeat everything, well, we were going in and out on this frequent flyer program, and they wanted to know kind of like from the beginning, and there was no way that I was able to do that. And so my husband would speak for me, or I'd say a couple words to correct something, and then he knew enough of what I was trying to say that he would communicate it to the medical staff. We always felt, I never felt as if I wasn't going to get better. And I think it was optimistic denial. I've never said that way before, but I think there's a sense of, there's a reality that's happening, but you don't really know what's happening. So it's not set in stone, and it's changing. And so I'm not going to give up and say, oh, okay, that happened to me once, like that's my life. I wanted to learn as much as I could about what caused high blood pressure, what I could do naturally in terms of eating, in terms of exercise, in terms of meditating. I listened to music that did some neural binaural toning that helped heal the brain. I mean, I was trying lots of different things to get past it. My handwriting took the longest, and I don't write longhand. I journal, but it's not as if we do it. As much typing really made me angry because I was a really fast typist, and I was burning that delete key because I wasn't able to type, correctly. And speaking was, and I remember one time when I was at work, when I was part-time, and we would have these weekly staff meetings. And so you imagine this customer conference room, and you've got like 20 people, and you've got a speakerphone in the middle for those who are remote, international. And we would bounce things off of each other. And I'd speak fast now. But when I first came back to work, it took a little longer to get the words out. And I didn't want people to think I was not, Beth's not okay. She can't do her job. And so I think once I started to answer, and then I've got 20 pairs of eyes looking at me, and I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong dang word. And so I think I waved it off like, I'll send it. It's too long to say in the meeting, so I'll send an email. But for months, I think unless it was a really short answer, I would just take notes and I would send it on an email later because I didn't want anybody, kind of seeing that I was struggling to get back, kind of catch back up. So to answer your question, it didn't feel like it was uh, the long tails of what I have left. There's still, when I get really excited or more nervous, that when I'm trying to talk, those last couple of words, it's like they just don't come out unless I really push them out. But if you didn't know I had a stroke, you probably wouldn't know I had a stroke. So, and age and memory wise, I tell people that if you remember, I remember a movie or an actor's name, and it's like it's on the tip of your tongue, and you just can't get it. That's what it felt like. That's what it felt like all the time.
How was it like with your family on your corner?
Family was great. I mean, the two girls who were in high school were scared, but my husband was on point. I needed lots of rest, so they'd go off to school, and I was able to rest and I was able to take care of myself. I wasn't able to drive for a while. That was fine. And so the spending time reading, some light writing as my handwriting came back. No, I felt very supported. I felt very supported. I will say it took me years before in fact, probably 10 years before I asked outright for my kids and my husband, do you feel like I've changed? It's like I couldn't ask them earlier. And I always felt like the essence of me was still there, but clearly the manifestation, what I was able to, how I was able to communicate and walk around the cabin of life was different than I was before. And I kind of didn't want to get an honest answer if it was going to be, yeah, you've changed. I didn't want to hear that. I couldn't hear that. I needed to kind of get enough confidence back myself where if they told me that, I'd be okay with it. But when I started, I am in the process of writing a memoir. And so my writing partners are, you got to ask them. You got to ask them. And so they were the ones to push. And the one daughter was in New York, so she wasn't really here. She was here at Christmas right after. And so I was sick, but then by the time she saw me again, I was better. And the two other ones, I think, were so busy, which was good in high school, that they weren't sitting there watching me because they had their life going on. But I do, when I mentioned that I don't get the words all out as fast as I want, sometimes I get teased. And I think I told them a year ago, and I said, that's not all because mom's in her 60s now. Some of that's a long tail from the stroke. So there are some times when I get teased, well intentioned, but I'm just letting you know that sometimes that hurts. And so they didn't realize, they weren't not being supportive. They were just, momisms, not that I would do wrong word, although I'll get names mixed up periodically. So how much of that is the stroke and how much of that is just, natural, normal aging? It's kind of hard to tell.
Wow. So it sounds like you've really gone through a whole a whole journey within these few years of
Mm-hmm.
suffering from the stroke, but also trying to regain your confidence. And now
Mm-hmm.
I would like to know on how did you get the confidence after I mean, you were talking earlier about typing, and you were hitting that delete button
Delete key.
and that delete key, but now you have a book, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
how did that come about? How'd you get the confidence to even start that project?
Well, I think there's a certain amount of, like I said, I had this optimistic denial. I didn't want anybody from work seeing me in the hospital. I didn't want my mom flying out. One of my sisters, I'm the eldest of six. one of my sisters said, "You got to take me or mom's coming out." And I was like, "Okay, I'll take you. I'll take you." And I didn't talk about it. And it wasn't until when COVID came, I'll back up a little bit. One of the things in my rebalancing my life that was important that I wasn't giving enough energy to was my writing. I got the screenwriting bug through working with Hollywood. So everybody's got a script, in their drawer. Had gone and pitched that, which was great. This after the stroke. But I wanted to spend more time with my writing. So I couldn't quit my job. I could have quit my job. I decided not to quit my job because we had two daughters still in high school, going to college. But that didn't mean that I couldn't spend more significant time with my writing. So my morning routine changed. Lunchtime, I would take off and I would go write. Before I'd go to work, I'd have coffee a couple times a week by myself and I would write. And a lot of it was poetry because that's what I was doing, and journaling. But it was all very private stuff. It wasn't yet, I mean, the screenplay I was working on, but it wasn't yet, it was more what I was writing for me. And then when I retired, I finally decided, well, let's go, submit some of the stuff you've been writing all these years. So I retired 7 years after the stroke. And so I submitted a poem that's a nose piercing, which I had to joke because my treat for myself, once my screenplay was optioned, was I was going to get my nose pierced. And then when I had my stroke, I thought, if you want to get your nose pierced, just get your nose pierced, which I did. And I wrote a poem about it and I got published. So here, getting my nose pierced was supposed to maybe be my reward for being published, but piercing my nose was the reason I got published, which was pretty funny. Life is ironic that way. Mm-hmm. And so when COVID came, there was an opportunity to something that came in my email box about a poetry chapbook. And I was thinking, geez, I'm just trying to get individual poems published. A chapbook's like a lot of poems. But it was interesting because it was one of the only, I think it's the only one I've seen where it was a not defined theme. Just had to have a theme within whatever chapbook you were doing, but it wasn't on, they didn't, the contest wasn't determining what that was. So I thought, well, you got all these poems. So I went through the poems, and the ones that were the best were the stroke poems. So I felt that the struggles that I had gone through, the hope and the struggles and what I experienced with the strokes felt more in tune with people acknowledging hard things that were going on in their life. And so it was the night before, felt like I was cramming for a test, decided which poems I was going to use. And one of them was really long. It was the morning of Thanksgiving when I woke up with an episode and had to go have an MRI. And I had to bring somebody in because the staff had off. And it was a really long poem. And I thought, I can't submit that. So I ended up carving it up into 8 different pieces. So that became the spine. And then I sprinkled in between that other poems. Some about the stroke, some about the wedding day with my husband. We were high school sweethearts. There was one about my sister who died when she was 3. So there was this life kind of event, but really circling around the poetry. And then when it became a finalist, I didn't want to talk about my strokes, but then here I have the book published. And so it's like, well, you didn't want to talk about the strokes, but if you're doing readings, you're going to have to talk about the strokes. And my youngest daughter made some comment one time, and she said, "Moms, you've been in denial about having the strokes." And I thought, I have not. Look, I wrote about this stuff, but she was right. And I think that denial was, again, the optimistic, I haven't changed. I'm still here. So I'm denying that the stroke now defines who I am. But that also belittled all the effort and the persistence and the advocating, which is an ode to my mom and my grandmother and my great grandmother in terms of obstacles that they overcame, which I owe to them. So it felt like my talking about the strokes was not just for me, it was for them, honoring them and modeling for my daughters.
And That's quite an accomplishment, first of all. Going through all that and being able to not only write about it, but even, talking about it.
Mm.
And I would like to ask, what have you learned from this whole experience? Not from only the strokes, but now that
Mm.
you can look back at your poetry, at your life, what lessons do you think people can get out of it?
I think, as I mentioned before, advocating for yourself. And for me, that meant my taking the time to quietly ask myself what that meant. As a working mom, and my mom certainly modeled everybody came first before her. And so my taking time to do my writing is selfish, was the little voice that, came through. You need to provide for your family. Everybody needs to go first. And then if you've got time. And so learning to rebalance that in terms of mom needs some time too. And if I'm not giving myself time, that's not modeling for my daughters what I want them to be able to do. So learning to advocate for myself, which meant my spending time with myself in terms of what was important. And yes, it was important that I was a kick-ass mom that could organize everything, that I was kick-ass at work. That was all great. But I'd find myself getting, once I started writing more, which was a dream that I had. So I'm glad that I made that that change in my schedule to do it and acknowledged it. But then I would notice that if I got too busy, that it somehow that didn't get done. Other stuff got done, but that didn't. And it's like I started getting cranky. It used to be, it's like, okay, I'm not feeling well. Did you get a good night's sleep? Have you eaten? Are you hydrated? And now it's, have you written? Um, and so I add everybody else, if that writing gets its oxygen, and it can be whatever. People like gardening, cooking, singing, whatever it is that is a passion project for you. That stuff it's really important to nurture that. I think it needs to be a little bit every day. It's like you save every day, or you try to save, but you don't have to save for college all at once for your kids, but you save a little bit every day. It's kind of like investing in yourself to take the time. So that's one. The other one is to get support. Was not good at asking for help. I was the oldest of six, and we were all girls. So as a girl, you didn't ask for help because that meant you were weak. We didn't have a lot of sports. Our girls had sports, so they're much better team players than I was. That was viewed as weakness, but the stroke helped to reinforce that. We can't do everything. And if you really pay attention at yourself, but there's a lot of support from people. And the last thing is the persistence and patience. Um, Many a time I remembered we climbed Mount Hood once. I only needed to climb the mountains once, and the way you do it is one foot in front of the other. So you're tired and all of that. And so with the stroke and projects, big projects, the same way. It's like you break them down into bite-sized pieces, and it's just one foot in front of the other. So that patience is a big element too.
Well, thank you for sharing the lessons learned, the wisdom behind
Mm-hmm.
all that you've been doing, and to kind of start wrapping things up.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening now in your life?
When I came out with the book, I'm still working on the memoir, but that's going to be a little while to bring that out. So it was trying to, build the platform, and I wanted to give back now that I had acknowledged that I'd had a stroke. And but for a long time, because I don't have a lot of the debilitations other people have, like as you mentioned, there's a side of their body that doesn't work. They really have severe aphasia. Cognitively, they've been affected, and so it felt like I was playing the stroke card, and I wasn't trying to do that. So it took a while for me to find a way to talk about it without having everybody like, oh, you had a stroke, because mine was not as, I was lucky relative to other people. So I started a podcast, and I did there's a lot of podcasts on stroke survivors, but I decided to focus on creative people, and it's any brain injury. So it doesn't have to be a stroke, or it could be any medical event or life event, where the essence of who you think you are is still there, but the manifestation or what you've gone through changes. And so how do people interact with those thoughts that we have in our head, and how did they change, if they changed during, before, during, and after the event? So I've been doing that podcast now for going on the second year. So that's been really rewarding, and meeting all these, wonderful people, many people who had like locked in syndrome. So talk about having artifacts that they had, much larger obstacles than I did. And then I also have a monthly writing group with creatives who've had brain injury. And so I'm using a technique that Natalie Goldberg, if anybody's familiar with her, she has this a priori writing, where just like musicians will practice notes as opposed to practice, she uses topics as a way to kind of come in sideways. And you've got these prompts where you keep writing forward. You don't edit. You don't go back and edit. You just keep writing. And if you don't know what to say, you just kind of repeat the prompt. And doing that, my voice in my writing, I could tell when there was an authentic voice that came in, but it took thousands and thousands and thousands. And that practice, which was not, oh, I'm going to write this essay, this poem, where you had this purpose. And so things come out that are a surprise, always surprised by what I write. And by having the technique of just writing and not letting yourself cross off and give the editor. So if the voice in your head is saying, this isn't any good, you just kind of like, when I'm done with this 20 minutes or however long, then you can go back and edit it. And as silly as that sounds, when I come back and read it again, it's kind of like, oh, the editor was quiet. This wouldn't have come out had I let, that's why longhand is important, because when you type, we get autocorrect. We get all these grammar kind of helpful aids that interrupt that process. And so I do that once a month. And then I have a newsletter and blog that I have while I'm working on the memoir.
And do you have like a website where people can find you?
Yes. It's bethbonness.com. So BETNESS.com. And you can sign up for my newsletter. You can sign up for, if you're interested in the writing group, the blog is up there, and the podcasts are also, and they're on Apple and Spotify, as you know. The book, you can find it any, kind of any place books are found, but there are links on the website that have it. So Transition Thunderstorms, you can Google that on whatever your favorite book, independent or otherwise, where you like to buy your books.
And to complete this episode, I wanted to humbly ask if it's okay if we perhaps hear one of your poems.
Oh, I would love that. I think I'll pick Wrong Word Dinner. So here's the book. Everybody does their little book. Wrong Word Dinner, because that to me was the epitome of what I went through. The Thanksgiving, there's 8 of them, and so I wouldn't read all of those, but that you get to experience a taste of it a little bit. But this one, kind of in a nutshell, has it. So here it is. Wrong Word Dinner. Robe of white wraps around my recovering body. My husband's and daughter's dinner table chatter surrounds me. Leftovers warm in the microwave. Everyone's smiling. Today's been a better day. Blood pressure's holding. Read a bit of a book. Sleep's been okay. Longer concentration than yesterday. Journaled with less fresh yet. My O's and E's and A's still collapse. Deflated helium balloons in my cursive. The girls chatter on about their day, peppered with questions from Dad. My private ping pong game is to keep up with their conversation. I lean in for a question. My lips part. By the time a thought is firm, the girls are off to the next topic. My lips close, forced smile intact. No reason to let them know I'm having trouble keeping up. Though they sense it, when they ask me a question, their pace slows. Beep! My husband's chair scrapes and squeals on the floor. As he starts to rise, I pop up before he does, wrapping my white robe sash tighter. The microwave door swings open. Words in my head stand in line, ready for their turn. Only they get all mixed up when they come out, like someone at camp stopping abruptly, an entire line of words falling over each other. My middle daughter points to an apple. I say orange. The word apple mute at the back of my brain, in the shadows. Her buddy Orange answers on Apple's behalf. My youngest daughter points to her water glass. I say chair. My smile collapses, joined by their smiles weakening. Not again. No evil snowflakes in my peripheral vision this time. No hand claw, only wrong words. Hunger disappears. Adrenaline fills my belly. Tears well up. I don't want the girls to see me like this. Stop talking, that's the wrong word. I slip away into the living room, lights off. Laughter from moments earlier disintegrate into murmurs. Too much excitement. Stay still for a bit. Doctor's orders. Meds and rest. The house is quiet. Meds and rest. Tears fall onto my white robe, invisible. I don't stop them until I hear footsteps. Youngest crouches down, her hands on my knees, voice gentle. Mama, you know you have to go back to the hospital, don't you? Her 15-year eyes searching for recognition in my almost 50-year ones. When did our roles reverse? I shake my head yes. Upstairs to change, with all my wrong words mashing around in my head, unable to get out in the right order.